study him when I was in school. And it's very interesting because I feel like, I think it was his father was a clergyman. And although he wrote a lot about poetry, some of his poems, alongside John Newton, have become hymns.
Hello and welcome everyone to the Jane Austen Literacy Foundation. My name is Melissa. I am the community manager. I am really excited to have you hanging out with us for a bit of poetry today. We had some fun chats that we've been doing in the past with personality quizzes, but this time we're going to get into a little bit of Jane Austen's poetry, which I must admit I do not know a lot about myself, so I am here to learn along with you. We have Mindy and Marigold are joining us this evening. I am going to let them take over the talking, and I'm just going to kind of take in everything and enjoy the poetry ride as it goes along tonight with our conversation. So, Mindy, why don't you give us a quick hello and introduce yourself, and then we'll kick it over to Marigold and let her get us started on this topic of poetry.
Great. Thank you. I'm Mindy Kilgrove-Harris, and I'm so excited to participate in this talk this evening because I, like Melissa, know a little bit of poetry. I've definitely taught some poetry, but my tastes are very particular. So I'm really glad that Marigold has a great background in poetry, and she's going to educate us all tonight.
No pressure, Marigold. We are here to learn from you. And Marigold, go ahead and introduce yourself, and then if you want to share with us a little bit about poetry, how it came into your life, and let us know what's going on with poetry today and how is it still a part of your life as well.
Well, hello, I am Marigold, and welcome to Poetry Month. April is a wonderful time where poets from all over the world like to celebrate by doing a poem a day. There's a lot of sites which I could post on our when we post this. The one I use is the Writer's Digest, where they give you a prompt every day, and you get to take a journal, and then you just write the prompt and you make a poem. And it's exciting because it's like you don't know what it is every day. So you get to celebrate the month with something new, and it's always fun. And poetry, I know, is very intimidating from a lot of people because sometimes you can just read a poem like, I don't get it, or what am I supposed to get? Well, the best thing about poetry is that you don't have to get it. You don't have to have a certain schooling in it or an experience. I like to say that you don't need to know anything about poetry to enjoy it. The other thing is that there is no wrong way to read poetry, and it's all about how it makes you feel. That's like the most important, both in writing or reading. It's just how people like to express themselves. So if you don't get it, it's okay. You might like something different. There are so many different types of poetry, and there is actually a long list. So we could also put two. There's haikus, free verse. There's ones with patterns of rhyme, limericks. Those are always fun. And I was going to say there's a long list, but the greatest thing is that you just find something that appeals to you. So I started poetry when I was in elementary school. I started because we had a wonderful woman that came in and taught the dynamics of writing to elementary kids, and it seems a little strange to have like elementary kids being very expressive, but when you started small with where you describe a carrot or something and you can make a poem out of that. And I enjoyed it because I am dyslexic and reading was very difficult for me, and taking a small piece of literature and going through it was a lot easier to grasp and understand. So it was a great little segue to reading, and I was reading poetry books before I could read anything else, so it was a journey. So that was my take on poetry. So it's great for any adults that have kids that have a hard time with reading. Try poetry. It would get them to have fun with rhyming and learning words that way, and then they'll graduate into full-size books.
Marigold, you really shifted. Go ahead, Mindy.
Go ahead.
As they really shifted my perspective, because I've always thought of poetry as being artsy and hard to understand. And when you kind of made me realize that there's a lot of freedom around it to just have fun and play with it. And I had never thought about it being less intimidating than getting through a whole novel for somebody that might be early on in their reading or struggling with their reading. And it completely shifted my perspective of poetry when you shared that with us. Mindy, you go ahead.
I was just thinking, like, when my kids were young, and I was introducing them to poetry, I used some Shel Silverstein. Did you have any poets that you really liked because you said you started when you were younger? Did you have any that appealed to you back then?
We had the sidewalk and right on my shelf, and that was like the beginning of, oh, this is fun. And then when we had the author come in that teach us how to write them, it was like, oh, really? So my graduation gifts, I should have brought them down, from sixth grade or fifth grade was my first Robert Frost book. And then a book that has all different like kids, but not actually, they're really kids. They're just a fun way of introducing kids to poetry. So as I learned and I started collecting books, I actually collect old vintage poetry books, and some of the poems in that mixed book are in these too. So I was blown away when I realized, oh, I've been reading adult ones since I was in elementary school. So my parents were very nurturing and supportive and thought, if this is the way she's going to read, let's support her. And it was the best thing for me.
That's amazing. And I know you're a huge Poe fan. So when did you fall in love with Poe's works? I'm guessing it's his poetry that drew you in.
It is. It's funny, you find one and you're like, well, they're a little long. They're an intimidating kind of, I understand. But if you break them up and you read them at little parts and you learn how the rhyme and the rhythm and the lyricalness to it just makes it interesting, then you want to keep reading the long ones. And that's how I was like, oh, I think we in middle school read a lot of his short stories. And once I found out that he did poetry, I was like, what? That was a whole news, and I had to read everything by Poe. So I became a big fan of his in middle school.
I love it. Well, I know we have...
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I know we have a lot of conversation to get into around Jane Austen's poetry. So I'll go ahead and share our slideshow that we have for tonight so we can start that. And I will sit back and listen to your commentary on the poetry so we can all learn a little bit about it.
Well, first of all, I want to tell you, a lot of her poetry are available online, so you don't have to worry about trying to find a book. But I do have one that I did purchase through Amazon. It's a very thin one. She did not write a lot of poetry, but it is much like her writing. It's very, well, obviously it's her writing, but much like her books, it's very descriptive. It's very informative on how she describes people. She was such a great character driven. The same with her writing and poetry. It's very concise, and you get the point. And she has that wit throughout it too, so it's very exciting.
Love it. Do you want to kick us off with our day in the life, and then we'll let Marigold jump back in with their poetry?
Absolutely. A day in the life of Jane Austen's characters. In the book Emma, it was during the month of April when Mrs. Elton determined she must find Jane Fairfax a position as a governess in the neighborhood of Maple Grove. And Melissa always does such a good job of hooking us up with these day in the life pieces, either from Jane Austen's life or from her character's life. But when she sent this one, I thought it was so appropriate for our poetry talk, because I feel like if Jane Fairfax had gone on to become a governess, she probably would not only have taught poetry, but she probably would have written it, because she was such a tortured soul, bless her. She's living this secret life sort of, and her love is not entirely what she wants it to be. So I definitely think Jane Fairfax would have been a poet. So I think this is appropriate today.
She would have been an early version of Taylor Swift, writing poetry, lyrics to go along with her piano pieces that she was writing. Love it. All right, Marigold and Mindy, I kick it over to you guys.
Okay, this one is, I have been used to consider poetry as a food of love, said Darcy, of a fine, stout, healthy love may, sorry, may everything nourishes what is strong already, but if it be only a slight then sort of inclination, I am convinced that one good sonnet will starve it entirely away. Sorry. They're so small, sorry.
I love that quote from Pride and Prejudice. I think it's so
agree.
fun.
She mentions poetry a lot in her writing, and it goes along when you would think she would have been writing so much more because she just read it and consumed it so much that you would think she would had books and journals full of it, which she also could have with the many letters that were burnt. There could have been sonnets and poems in them.
Absolutely. I think it was pretty common. They had those, like cute little books back then that people probably had a lot of poetry that they were passing from each other to each other.
Absolutely. I'm going to read this one from here.
And we see Emma and Harriet Smith where they're copying down, whether it's they're just a smaller, an aphorism or bits of poetry in her little book. And I think that's so wonderful because Jane Austen probably did that too.
Absolutely. I think a lot of writers do that. I have a quote book. I have something that I love the way it's written. I have to write it down so I can keep it. So I'm sure she probably had multiple writings of the same thing that she found, especially from all the poets and writers that she read. So this one was my favorite. It's Miss Lloyd has now went to Miss Green. I'm going to read it this one because it goes, Miss Lloyd has now sent to Miss Green, as on opening the box may be seen, some years of black Ploutman gauze, to be made up directly because Miss Lloyd must in mourning appear for the death of a relative dear. Miss Lloyd must expect to receive this license to mourn and to grieve. Complete ere the end of the week, it is better to write than to speak. Again, she has great rhyming. There is, I won't go into the types of the technical, but there is a certain way a lot of people, when they write poetry, try to keep that ending. This one is like an A, E, B, like the rhyming. And she just takes good poetry license in making the third and fourth line, even though they do not phonetically match, they have those same sounds, so it still goes. There's just so much in there too with her wit. It just is exciting to me. I love her smart.
What do you think this is about? What do you think Austen was trying to say here? I kind of have an inkling, but I would love to hear what you think, since this was your.
I had written that the poem is witty and slightly ironic, takes the social custom, like a mourning attire, likely from the 18th or 19th century, and possibly written. That's not where I was. Where they? Oh, it's just like a snapshot, I feel like, of her time, and I feel like that's why she writes. She's just like taking a part of her everyday life and putting it together. I don't know that's what a lot of writers in general do. But the poem is like charming and witty, and it shows her like true feelings and social formalities. I don't know if any of that makes sense either. Of course, that's my interpretation too. So someone else could find it totally different. Maybe like, I don't get it, or it just rhymes nice.
Mindy, what are you thinking?
Well, for me, I'm really focused on that final line. It is better to write than to speak. And I could be completely misinterpreting this, but I think that she's trying to say when a person is grieving, sometimes it is more therapeutic or even better for their process if they can write out their feelings rather than talking them out. I know when I've gone through my own grieving process, when I was talking, I was a little bit all over the place. And just because you go from the different emotions, right? There's anger and denial and then sadness. And so I think maybe what Austen was trying to say is that as people work their way through, if they write out their feelings, it might be more cathartic. I don't know.
This is what I love about poetry, because I took a completely different view of what she was writing. So I saw it as, so we have our first character, Miss Lloyd, that's introduced to us, and she has this morning attire that she's previously worn at some point in her life, and she's sending it in a box to Miss Green because Miss Green now has a reason to be mourning herself. And this passing of the gauze is a permission slip to enter into her mourning. And I took the last sentence as it's better to write than to speak, and don't put yourself on someone that's already in a state of grieving and become a burden to them by visiting, where you would be speaking in person, but just write to them and send your condolences so you're not adding to the stresses that they have in their life. And that's such a beautiful thing about poetry, because it spoke to us all completely different ways, but I think it's all valid in how you interpret the poetry.
Absolutely. That's the fun part of it. The only one that really knows what it meant is her. So whoever writes poem, that's what they feel, and that's what they're putting out there. But it's for anyone who's reading at that time what it means to them. They might be going through the same grief, and then it's comforting to them. So it's always fascinating, the meanings of it.
Marigold, do you find when you write your own poetry, do you look back on it years later and think of it in a different light, or do you wonder, what was I feeling at the time when I was writing this?
Absolutely. I've had poems that I've started, and then when I've gone back multiple years, I've added to them. So even though I thought maybe back then it was complete, I've grown and changed and evolved in a way that I continued it. So that's the other part of the poetry, is that it's never really done unless you feel like it's done. So you can always go back and rearrange. I have some poems that I've been working on since like college, and I've changed so many times, or I've added, or I'm like, what was this? This line doesn't make sense. So it's a process that it's never done unless you feel like, okay, it's done. You can put it out there.
Same editing process kind of as Mindy's going through when she's writing her books. You are continuously going through with your poetry.
Absolutely.
I love that.
Someone else want to read this one?
From Persuasion, we have, she thought it was the misfortune of poetry to be seldom safely enjoyed by those who enjoyed it completely, and that the strong feelings which alone could estimate it truly were the very feelings which ought to taste it, but sparingly. I sort of feel like if I didn't know this came from Persuasion, I would have guessed it came from Northanger Abbey, because it makes me think of Catherine and how she reacts to especially John Thorpe. Just how he's so brutish. I can see her being, very put off if he were to try to recite poetry to her.
I agree.
It also is kind of giving me possibly Caroline Bingley vibes when I was reading it. I was trying to figure out, is it for poetry, opposing poetry? Which way is it taking? As we're looking, it's a very complex sentence with all of our commas and semicolons and a lot of thoughts going on in there for one sentence.
I could see how she'd be like, sparingly.
Absolutely. I did want to say, Mindy has links for us, so I will share them below. You said you have little clips, so look for those in the description box under the video.
This was my pick, Ode to Pity, and this comes to us from Jane Austen's Juvenilia. I had the pleasure of covering some of Jane Austen's Juvenilia for the Jane Austen Summer Program. And so this was one that I got to not only take a deeper dive into, but do a little bit of analysis. And because I don't have my glasses on, I cannot see that teeny tiny print. So I do encourage our viewers to please read along, at your own pace, or if you click on the video later, it's actually me reading because I created a video as a tribute to Ode to Pity. But in this piece of Jane Austen's Juvenilia, she does dedicate it to her sister, Cassandra. Um, and that was one of the things that I really liked about it. And I believe when I was working my way through it, it reminded me so much of the vibe you get when you're reading Miss Austen, which was our book club pick, of course, from last month. And it comes out feeling almost prophetic because Jane talks about someone who is sort of having a melancholy time in their life. And when you read, of course, Miss Austen, we see that Cassandra did have very periods of her life that she was exceptionally despondent, and she had some awful things happen, and that sort of changed her course of where her life was going to go. So this is a nice short one too, just like the one Marigold picked, and I hope our viewers get the chance to check out Ode to Pity.
I will definitely be reading and listening to that.
Absolutely.
I wonder who first discovered the efficacy of poetry in driving away love. That is a good one. All right, Marigold, is this for you?
I didn't pick this poem, but I do enjoy. Did I pick? I don't think I picked this.
Jane Austen's favorite poet.
I think it's one of she loved. I know it's pronounced Cooper. That's what I was going to say. William Cooper, who I found out because I did study him when I was in school, and it's very interesting because I feel like I think it was his father was a clergyman, and although he wrote a lot about poetry, some of his poems, who alongside John Newton, have become hymns. I believe that is like a very close connection where her father was a clergyman, and I'm sure she spent a long time listening to hymns in church. And I wonder if that is one connection where she started enjoying his poetry. And I know it's one of her favorites. It was him. And he's also mentioned in letters she wrote, 1789 letter. She says her father reads Cooper in the morning. He's mentioned in Sense and Sensibility. Mary Ann gets Edward Ferrars to read Cooper. Mansfield Park mentions him twice. I think Fanny Price mentions him in both. And then Emma, Mr. Knightley, when he is trying to work out the relationship with Churchill and Fairfax, makes a comment that's a line from Cooper's poem, The Task, which pops in his head. So in Mr. Knightley's thoughts, it comes in his head as this part that comes from this poem. So, and there's even more. I think is 1807 letter written that she's writing about planting a garden, and she also mentions that I could not do without a syringer for the sake of Cooper line, referring to The Task. So I'm assuming The Task is actually probably her favorite of his poems, only because it's mentioned so many times in her writings too. So she mentions him a lot. I believe it's like her favorite poet. So I encourage anyone to look him up because he has a lot. The only thing is The Task is like a very long book. It's like one poem that, I'm sure it's not, I have not read it. So I've read sections of it. And I want to say there's light, a shining of darkness is part of it too. But it's a very long poem. It was published, I think, in 2 parts. So she would have gotten parted separately, but they were also in the Chawton House. So that's probably where she went and first saw it, is in the library.
It's amazing.
I feel like what reminds me, when we're looking at the Cooper poem, and even how you reference the way that Mr. Austen used it, it reminds me very much of when people do daily meditation practices. Mm-hmm. I know some people like quiet, but when I go ahead and do some daily meditation, mine is always a nice, soothing voice that's talking. And I feel like those Cooper poems would be so great for something like that.
Absolutely. He was known for being like the nature and religious. He'd always go back to those themes. So they're incorporated in a lot of his work, which also is very much like Jane, nature, observing, developing those characters because of her observing of people. It's the same as observing the nature. So I find that she probably identified a lot with his writing and why she enjoyed him so much.
On our last slide there, I'm so sorry, the print is so small. It was from the poet Crabbe and the other one, before. This is another poet that Jane Austen is supposedly was one of her favorites. But in some of her letters, she actually references having a friendship or maybe some kind of relationship with him. And so that's kind of fun for all of us Janeites who like to dive deeper into Austen's affairs, let's say.
Absolutely. I don't know much about him.
That makes me think a little bit of First Impressions that we read for book club, and her kind of having a relationship with a mutual at the time, whether it be author, writer, poet.
Absolutely.
The illusion of it. I know our time is flying by, so trying to get us through some of these if we have to come back and do a part two, we will do a part two. But I think we're on to modern lyrical poets, Dylan. Mindy, I'll hand this over to you.
Oh, this was Marigold's pick.
Oh, Marigold.
If anyone listens to folklore or folk music, a lot of folk music is just poetry in music and like in lyrics. And as you can even see, the structures are similar. They have stanzas, they have rhyming at the end. So it's pretty much like This Is Blowing in the Wind, which is one of my favorites. But it's just a poem set to music. And that's what music really is. I mean, even rap music, even not everybody, I'm not a huge rap fan, but it's rhyming and couplets and stanzas and all of that terms are, but it's in a fun way it's like a modern, what Jane would be reading is now in this we can listen to.
It is so true. Everyone's homework now is to go and listen to the song and see if you feel the poetry in it when you're listening.
It does. It's so nice. It's just, if we've been the link, you'll love it.
And I believe this was mine, right?
Yeah, that was your pick. Yeah.
I want to make sure I didn't steal it from you, Mindy. But yeah, I think it's definitely, I mean, Taylor's been around for how many years now, and she is just loved for her lyrics. I wouldn't say I'm the ultimate Swiftie, but I enjoy her music. All the popular songs, they're always so catchy and they're so easy to remember as well. And I think that's one of the fun things about poetry is not all of them, but a lot of them feel accessible and easy for memorization, that sort of thing. The cadence definitely helps with that. And I think she does a great job without feeling too childish rhymey, that it flows and it's easy to listen to. I'm just in awe of how many songs she writes. I know that I don't even know how many she has at this point that she's written for herself and other people. And it's just very impressive. She could probably put them all together and have a multiple novel length of books out of all the lyrics that she's written.
Absolutely.
Now I selected Babe because I love that one. But Melissa, do you have a choice Taylor Swift song that is, something that you enjoy?
My goodness. You put me on the spot and I have to think through Taylor Swift. I love her one, and I never remember book titles. I'm not going to remember the song title, so maybe you'll help me. But her one, that's like the Romeo and Juliet kind of play on that.
Sorry.
Yes, I think that is such a classic from her, and it's really fun, the imagery in the song. I like the play with the wording that she did on that and kind of capturing that Romeo and Juliet vibe. But then some of her newer ones are such a different sound to that they're really good. I'd have to look through them, and I'm sure I could definitely pick some favorites, but that's the one that comes to mind first, that I really just appreciated her lyrics in the song. And Mindy, what have you got for us?
So for my modern lyrical poet, when I think of poetry in general, my favorite poets tend to be those who wrote the epic poetry. So I love things like Beowulf and Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. But I think the reason I like those so well is because they tell a story. So when I was selecting my lyrical poet, I went with Kenny Chesney because so many of his songs from beginning to end have this, like Taylor Swift, right? They have this full story in there where you're following a character and you're seeing them grow throughout the 4 minute, the 4 minute song. So I think it's so beautifully done. And in this one in particular, There Goes My Life. When I used to teach poetry to my students, I would use this one as an example. And then I would follow it up by showing Kenny Chesney's music video for this. And I would tell my students, if you want to see Mrs. Harris cry, this is the time, because I would sob.
Oh my goodness. So clearly you like really light, fluffy nighttime reading like Beowulf when you're getting ready to go to sleep.
Just a bit of light reading.
One thing is like so wonderful for poetry and that whole storyline. It's so wonderful.
Absolutely. All right, we made it through. I think we can definitely have another conversation about poetry, though. It's a really great topic, and I know I have poetry from Jane Austen on my shelf with her Juvenilia, so I'm going to dig that up, and I encourage anybody else, if you haven't checked it out, to, as you said, Marigold, it's really accessible, too, to just grab one poem to read through at a time and not feel like you have to dive all the way into a big, heavy book of it. To have some fun, play around with it, leave comments asking Marigold for recommendations if you need, and we'll have a bunch of links underneath our conversation with some poetry for you to check out as well. As you can see on the screen here, we've got some upcoming events that you can join us. How do you decide which adaptations to watch is going to be a really fun conversation, and I feel like we're going to all possibly have different ways that we pick. We will see, because we have not discussed that ahead of time. And then reviewing episode 1 of Miss Austen. So when that launches or releases on May 4th, for those of us here in the US, we will be watching it and then have a discussion about it. So please join us. It'll be week by week as we watch through those episodes. And that's going to be so much fun, because I feel like we've been waiting for that to drop here for forever. So I'm very excited. And Marigold, as our resident expert on all things TV and movie, I feel like you're going to have a lot to share with us on that topic as well.
Absolutely. Have plenty to watch about Jane Austen. That's most loved movies and shows. Everyone loves to recreate them.
Perfect. Thank you again, both of you, for sharing your knowledge about poetry. And it was a lot of fun. I feel encouraged and emboldened to go check some out now and read it. And hopefully everyone watching along with us will do the same. So until next week, we will see you again soon. Take care. Bye.